Well, good morning, everyone. If I can have your attention, please. Okay, everybody. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 1 to 5 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 150 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 210 days for an official plan amendment. And a comment sheet is available at the door for anyone wishing to submit written comments on these amendments or to sign up to speak. And I just want to say to, which I will say at every meeting, to committee members, if you have any motions on any of the items listed today, it's really helpful if you send a copy to us ahead of the public delegations so that committee members and staff have an opportunity to review, and more importantly, the people that are coming to make, the delegations that are coming forward, so they know what we're thinking. If there's a chance to have that information ahead of time, it helps clarify the motion during the discussion of the matter. So thank you. I do. Thank you all for being here today for the first planning committee of the new term of council. We don't have an especially full agenda today, which of course is never the norm, but I thought it was a good opportunity to talk a little bit about where we're going in this term. Planning committee is the busiest of all the standing committees of council, and it's rare we get such a light agenda. We often refer to it as the big committee that just keeps on giving. There's no shortage of interesting planning matters to consider in this city, usually with healthy and vigorous debate. And given the planning department's ambitious work plan for the year ahead, it's fair to say we're not likely to see a dip in our workload. This is probably a good time for me to welcome our newest committee members, Councillors Dudas, Gower, and Moffat, although certainly Councillor Moffat is new to this committee, but he's not new around City Hall. Over the last term of council, every member of this committee proved time and again how invested they were in trying to guide the best version of Ottawa possible. I'm sure our newest members will all bring that same level of interest in planning matters and engagement around each file that comes before us. There's a great deal of planning experience around this table already, but I'm sure the fresh insights our new colleagues bring with them will only make our decisions more valuable. As always, as we move through each agenda, we continue to have the expertise of an incredible team of city planners at our disposal to help guide deliberations, not to mention a knowledgeable legal staff. Planning regulations can sometimes be arcane and complex, but I'd like to thank staff for their continued good work and the guidance they provide to members of the committee. You are always prepared to answer our questions and make sure we understand exactly what's before us. And sometimes that's not easy. It can be very confusing. You're going to be an important resource for us over the course of this term of council in particular. We have some major pieces of work coming up over the next year. One of the biggest undertakings over the next 4 years will be the development of a new official plan. That work will officially get underway at our next meeting on February 14th, in fact. We will discuss a report called Ottawa Next, Beyond 2036, and Mr. Willis will be making a presentation at that meeting, so heads up to the few media that are here, you definitely will want to mark that on your calendar. Ottawa Next is not a specific vision for the future of Ottawa, but it does explore a variety of scenarios that look well beyond the next 20 years to identify some of the challenges we'll need to consider as we prepare a new official plan. Developing a new official plan is a complex process, one that will include substantial public consultation and that will also require occasional guidance from our committee. I look forward to discussing the work plan for the new official plan in more depth next month. Another major item on the agenda this year will be the update of the Development Charges bylaw before the end of May, as required by the Development Charges Act. The updated bylaw will make sure Ottawa continues to collect enough in levies on new properties to help pay for all new infrastructure needed to support a growing city. And speaking of paying for the city, we will of course spend considerable time in February discussing portions of the annual budget that are relevant to planning. We can expect to see a report this year on a recent staff review of the site plan control application process as well, along with recommendations to help make the process more efficient and more cost-effective. Of course, all of this is on top of our regular slate of site-specific land use planning matters to consider, including a great many official plan and zoning bylaw amendments for everything from small projects to large-scale developments and entire subdivisions. We'll get into more discussion of what's coming up when the 2019 work program for the Planning, Infrastructure, and Economic Development Department comes before us at the end of March. But clearly, we have a busy year ahead of us. So let's get on with it. Okay, any declarations of interest? None? Confirmation of minutes of the November 20th, 2018 meeting. Should be somebody who was on the committee. Carried. Thank you. Item number 1 is the zoning bylaw amendment for 180 Island Park Drive, and we'll be holding that as... Did you say hold? But there's a whole bunch of people in the audience that already made that decision. So we're holding that item. Item number 2 is the zoning bylaw amendment for 2983 and 3053 Navin Road, and we have one person who has signed up this morning who, so we'll be holding that item as well. Did somebody call me? Yeah, but it's not you. No, it's not you. I have somebody in opposition.
Paul signed up as well.
Okay. See, I didn't even know about you. But hang on, everybody. I've got to write down a late signer. Item number 3 is zoning bylaw amendment, 5035, 5045, and 5055 Innovation Drive. Murray Chown's here to represent. Does anyone have any questions? Murray, are you happy to not speak if we're prepared to carry it?
More than happy not to speak this morning, Madam Chair.
Perfect. You spoke enough last night. So is this item carried? Thank you. Zoning bylaw amendment, 575 Dealership Drive in my ward. Dan Paquette's here. Hi, Dan. Does anyone have any questions on this application on McKenna land? Dan, do you need to speak if we're prepared to carry it? Thank you very much. Is it carried? Great, it's carried. Next item is the O-Train Network Development Zone of Influence. I have no speakers registered. Is it carried? Yeah. And item number 6, we have a deferral motion from Vice Chair Tierney on the Planning Committee Terms of Reference.
Great, thanks, Madam Chair. I'll dispense with the novel that I could read out of whereas the nuts and bolts is this is just to set the timing better with built heritage subcommittee reports. So therefore it be resolved that the Planning Committee defer consideration of the draft revised terms of reference until a draft revised built heritage subcommittee's terms of reference have been submitted to the Planning Committee for considerations currently expected for February 14th Planning Committee meeting.
So that the two of them come to council at the same council meeting. Okay, is that carried? So deferral's carried. Okay, and then we have an IPD and information previously distributed on inclusionary zoning. Okay. And we also, we have a motion to be added today. This one's going to take 2/3 of the voting, of us voting to put it onto the agenda for discussion today. And did you want to introduce the motion? It's...
Great, sure, I'll read it out to Madam Chair. That the Planning Committee approve the addition of the following item to the agenda for consideration by the committee at this meeting pursuant to section 89.3 of the procedural bylaw in order to give timely consideration to the matter. As there's not been a committee meeting since November, and the applicant would like to apply to the Committee of Adjustment as soon as possible. So whereas the report for 168 Daly Avenue was approved at the Council January 31st, 2018. Is that 2018? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, 2018 to permit the office limited by the embassy, whereas the owner would like to undertake renovations including but not limited to the porch construction that it would necessitate a need for minor variances to the zoning bylaw 2008-250, and whereas the procedural where the proposed porch construction is consistent with the applicable guidelines with the heritage conservation district and represents a good heritage conservation practices, whereas section 45 1.3 of the Planning Act does not permit an application for a minor variance before a second anniversary of the initial zoning amendment, January 31st, 2020, whereas section 45 1.3 of the Planning Act permits council to declare the resolution that such an application would be permitted. I'm getting to it now. Therefore, it be resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Council that the application to Committee of Adjustment be permitted in respect to the property at 168 Daly Avenue for minor variances associated with the proposed renovations.
Respect to lifting delegation? Question with respect to lifting to the
Sure.
Quick question before we vote to lift this to the agenda. Does Councillor Fleury
Yes, he
know
does.
that? Okay, thank you.
That information been offered several times. Yeah, he's well aware. And are you aware of this, Councillor Glenn Gower? Okay, so before we get to this on the agenda, if we lift it, just for those in the audience, Councillor Gower is now the chair of Build Heritage Subcommittee. So I would appreciate who is Court here, or Dana, or anybody on the? Okay, can you have a chat with him, you know, when you get an opportunity? But really, what it is, they want to add a porch. It fits into the Heritage District. They need to go to Committee of Adjustment still, and so we have to provide the opportunity for that to happen. Really, that's the time. It's timing. Okay, so can we agree that we can go on the agenda at the end of the agenda? Carrie? Okay. So it's on the agenda, the last item on the agenda. All right. Okay, so we'll go back to the beginning, back to item number 1. Item number 1, J.C. Renault is the planner. We do have some speakers, as I said. This is 180 Island Park Drive, a zoning bylaw amendment. Mr. James is here. Okay, we're not having a presentation, so I think I'll go right to the delegations. Mr. Paul Forrester. Paul, welcome. Come on down. You're the Vice President of the Island Park Community Association. And thank you for your presentation in advance. And sit at that first seat. Is it easier if you sit at the second seat just because that's where that is? So JC, if you would sit there, just move over. Yeah, sure. So just, it's the start of a new term, and just so that I will put this out there, and you will be reminded many times if you come many times here that your speaking time as a delegation is 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Paul Forster. I'm a 19-year resident of Island Park Drive and Vice President of the Island Park Community Association, and we're here to oppose the rezoning of 180 Island Park. We believe the zoning is not consistent with the residential uses in the neighborhood. The residences along Island Park Drive form a community not because they look like single-family homes or are coexist with single-family homes, but because they are single-family homes. People live in them. People raise families in them. They occupy them outside of business hours. They even appear before committees to defend and protect them. They have a stake in them as places to live, along with neighbors who also live in the area. So the non-residential use does not fulfill that function. The R in R1, as far as we're concerned, stands for residential. The very fact that the proposed office function does not cannot be accommodated in the current dwelling and cannot be accommodated because it's a single-family residence shows the incompatibility of the proposed use with the single-family character of the site and the surrounding neighborhood. Secondly, the impact of the rezoning is significant. The planning report refers to the site as on the periphery of the neighborhood, but this is misleading. It's well within the gateway established by the NCC at the northern edge of the neighborhood. It is surrounded by single-family homes on 3 sides. Even the rezoning application itself stresses the prominence of the site as the first property on the west side that you meet when you come from the parkway into the neighborhood. Given its prominence, it's anything but peripheral to the identity of the street and the identity of the local area. And it's no less deserving of protection under current R1 zoning than any other address on the street. Thirdly, the rezoning for office use reverses almost 100 years of policy. It's against the NCC covenants that established the neighborhood in the 20s. It's not permitted under the long-standing R1 zoning in the area. It was deliberately excluded under zoning changes in the late 80s. It was deemed non-conforming in 2010, which means it should revert to a proper R1 use should the property be destroyed or change hands. And it's deemed incompatible in 2014 when a previous application of this nature was turned back by this committee and by council. And it's at odds with the policy of preserving the residential character of the street through area-specific zoning passed in 2018. We're also concerned that the zoning will set a dangerous precedent. Staff claims that the R1 protections remain on the street and elsewhere in other neighborhoods, while at the same time arguing that an office building is compatible with the surrounding single-family residences in an R1 zone. This strikes us as a tenuous position. If an embassy is okay at this address on Island Park, why not at other addresses? And if an embassy office is okay in an R1 zone, why not other office uses as well? Granted, this is not what staff intends, but the construction of an office building was never intended for Island Park either when we allowed diplomatic missions and welcomed them onto the street, and when previous rezoning application was rejected. Yet here we are facing a staff recommendation that all previous intentions be contravened. Staff assurances notwithstanding, the logic of their argument that a non-residential office building belongs in this area is ripe for exploitation at other addresses on the street and in other R1 zones. Meanwhile, any other argument they could give for blocking office uses elsewhere seem to me to apply to this site just as well. Finally, reasonable alternatives exist, so the rezoning is unnecessary. There has been no justification in the staff report or anywhere else for giving the Thai Embassy's desire to build an office building on this site priority over the wishes of residents and long-standing policy. They remain free to refurbish or rebuild the residence. They can build an office elsewhere in the city on an appropriately zoned site. These are the same options open to every other embassy on the street, and every other embassy has accepted them. The community has been given no justification for granting the Thai Embassy an exceptional privilege in this regard. So as stewards of the heritage of the city and its long-standing neighborhoods, we really implore you to reject this rezoning of 180 Island Park Drive. Thank you very much.
So I just have a question for you.
Certainly.
So it gives you no level of comments, because we have been I've been talking with other members of committee. I was talking with Vice Chair Tierney this morning. I've spoken with our legal staff. It gives you no level of comfort that the use is tied specifically to the embassy itself and is not sustained whether it's sold or whatever. That gives you that it's an embassy use only. That gives you no level of comfort.
It does give me no level of comfort. It's not a residence, and it is a thin end of the wedge as far as I can see. The justification here can be extended elsewhere.
So really that this is before us because they want to formalize what they've been doing since 1987 or something, having their office within the embassy where the ambassador lived.
Yes.
Correct?
But the understanding of the presence of diplomatic missions on the street was that they were residences first and foremost, and that change is big for us as a neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
Certainly.
Hang on, Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Paul. Excellent presentation, and I agree obviously with everything that you said. One of the issues that is coming up, I think, is the difference that somehow an embassy is different from an office building. Do you see any functional differences between having an office building or an embassy on the street?
Functional differences?
Yeah.
It seems to me they're both workplaces. They're not residences, and that for us is a really key difference.
Yeah. I think, do you share the same understanding I have that there are going to be 16 parking spots associated with this?
Absolutely. That's another big difference. The underground parking is different functionally from what's around there as well. And
You'd have to have a lot of cars to ever want to move into that building as a residence again.
Yeah, absolutely. Once it's done, it's not going to be undone.
Exactly.
And no other embassy has, that entitlement. It strikes us as odd to try and make an exception and exclude it from every other property on the street.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Next up, we have Heather Mitchell, Westboro Community Association. Heather? Sit in the first seat, please. I just had him sitting there because he had a presentation. Thank you. Welcome. You have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Yes? Oh, everyone can hear me. Good. So I am Tell Not Show. So, good morning, councillors. My name is Heather Mitchell. Our family lived on Island Park Drive for 20 years, and my husband and I were active on the board of the Island Park Community Association for 3 years. And I'm also here as a representative of the Westboro Community Association. Like my colleague before me and colleagues that are going to speak to you after, I believe there's a few more speakers, we're against this application because it requests a spot zoning change for a single property on a street to allow an office building. And this does set a precedence for the street, the neighborhood, and the city overall. Why on earth would the planners allow this? It's a 100-year-old planned residential street on an NCC parkway system that has 6 embassy residences on it, a church, 2 monuments, a boulevard, and one of the finest collection of mid-20th century homes assembled on a single street in the city. There are others, but it is one of only a few. For many years now, and against the wishes of the community in the city, the Thai embassy has been flouting the zoning rules. It has been used as an office with no residential function. Now, they want to formalize the situation, and they need to change the zoning to do it. But I ask you, if they want an office, why on earth wouldn't they move their operations elsewhere in the city that supports the appropriate zoning, rather than disrupt the community in which they reside? Why are they putting us all through this? Why are you here? Why am I here? Why not just go to a place that's zoned for an appropriate office building, as many, many other embassies in the city have done? I invite you, therefore, to consider this. There are 27 embassies in Sandy Hill, 7 in the Glebe, 77 in the downtown core, 2 in Rockcliffe, 7 in New Edinburgh, 1 in Old Ottawa South, and 5 more on Island Park Drive. 5 more. Several of these districts are residential and have distinctive homes of heritage character. I know most of the ones in the core are actually already in non-residential situations, but almost all these other neighborhoods are residential in their function. If you approve this, you are opening the door to the same type of zoning change all across the city. The staff report assures us that an R1 restrictions will remain in place for the rest of the street. But as I just mentioned, there are 5 other embassy residences on IPD, and if one of these asks for the same, how could they be denied? The answer is they would not. The planners also hasten to note that the zoning changes would only apply to the future owners of the property, would not apply to the future owners of the property, that it must stay within the embassy function. Well, that's ridiculous. I don't see how anyone has any authority over what future bureaucrats or councils will decide and what they will do. Then Island Park Drive, if all the embassies made that decision and decided they wanted a piece of this action too, Island Park Drive would no longer fulfill its function as a planned residential community integrated with the city's well-known Parkway Drive system. And just a sidebar, we in the community won't be appeased if the office building kind of looks like a house. It is the use of the property and its attendant zoning change that is the biggest issue now and, of course, for the future. So we ask ourselves, why are the planners putting the needs of the embassy first rather than the needs of the community? It's actions like these that undermine trust in the city's decision-making processes and confidence in the integrity of the official plan. And I'm really looking forward to that being on your February agenda. We'll all be watching that very closely. This is very tightly linked together. We're extremely unhappy that staff has approved this application. We ask that the Planning Committee consider this matter carefully and broaden the scope of your deliberations past this one street to fully appreciate the precedent this sets for the city. Your own neighborhoods could be next. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions? Thank you for coming out today. Next, Heather Pearl. Are you here, Heather? There you are. You're here often enough, you almost need a special place to either park a car in rotten weather or put your bike in good weather. An office now she wants. Anyway, Heather is the co-chair of the Champlain Park Community Association. You know, as you know, Heather, you have 5 minutes.
Yes.
Do you have a presentation?
I prepared a presentation. I have prepared a longer one that I hope is resolved to meet. And I just wanted to sort of reiterate a few points that...
Turn your mic on, please.
Sorry. Just reiterate a few points that some of the others have made. Basically, we are in opposition to this application. We'd be very pleased to hear that the owners were establishing a new diplomatic mission in full compliance with the R1P residential zoning, the mature neighborhoods overlay, and alternative provisions. The site context is that it's been part of Ottawa's scenic and historic parkway systems for almost 100 years. Its importance was implicitly reaffirmed in the Greber Plan, which created this parkway system, and one goal was to make the city aesthetically pleasing. This is the first residence on the west side of the residential gateway. Any discussion of this property being on the periphery of the neighborhood must consider the full context. This is the zoning that is applicable in this area. It's 180I is R1P, but it is under the mature neighborhoods overlay, and it's sideways. Sorry.
I can't rotate it.
Okay, but that's okay. The nearest commercial properties are located almost a kilometer away on the IPD Wellington Street Richmond Road intersection. Some are being constructed about 700 meters away on the south side of Scott Street. There is an infrequent OC Transpo bus that goes by Clearview, but the nearest transit stop is almost 800 meters away. So an office building at this location would be isolated and not contribute in any way to a lively, animated streetscape. Workers will need to drive to access shops and restaurants. Office workers and office visitors have other priorities than to engage with community members, whereas an ambassador living in a diplomatic mission is a resident neighbor who has a stake in building with other neighbors a safe, accessible, vibrant community. This is a distinctive street. It's listed as one of the scenic entry routes on Schedules I and J of the official plan. We note that non-conforming rights always cease when there's a change in the to the building, when a new construction. This has been a long-standing protection for people who had rights pre-zoning change, and then they knew that at some point they would have to give those rights up. And whatever the exterior design of any new building in IPD, its reversion to use as a residence is key. If rezoned and rebuilt as an office, the interior will not be suitable for residential occupancy in the future. When the property is sold, the following issues will arise. The city has no power to restrict the sale to other embassies, and these are the only buyers who could legally use it as an office. The owners may be able to claim that the exception is too restrictive because it limits their ability to realize the full value of sale of a commercial building. They or the next owner will apply to rezone the property. Given the sparse justification presented for allowing this exception in the first place, how will future full rezoning not be approved? The proposed language in the exemption provision and the language in the staff report highlight the probability that once the zoning is changed, there will be a sale and that further rezoning will be forthcoming. They say, should a general office wish to locate on the property in the future, the proposal's appropriateness would need to be evaluated through rezoning at that time. I contend that the proposal to put an office building here to begin with is not appropriate. I've noted that while the city is supportive of the establishment of a broad mix of uses in Ottawa's neighborhoods, this is not meant to imply that all uses will be permitted everywhere within areas that are designated general urban area. The zoning bylaw will continue to regulate the location, scale, and type of land use in accordance with the provisions of this plan. I looked at the Planning Act and looked at the matters of provincial interest. And of note are D, P, R, and Q. The conservation of features of significant architectural, cultural, historical, archaeological, or scientific interest, while IPD is a scenic entry route and part of Ottawa's scenic and historic parkway systems, as reaffirmed in the Greber Plan. The intent of the R1 Exception 2499 zoning in effect is to conserve the community's cultural and historical character. Allowing an office building to locate here is inconsistent with conservation of this character. P, the appropriate location of growth and development. This scenic entry point was never designed for or intended to allow office building. This continues to be an inappropriate location to build one. R, the promotion of built
Heather,
form.
your time's up.
Okay.
But we do have the longer version, and Councillor Leeper has a question for you.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to make sure, Heather, that we understand the argument you're making with respect to what might happen here. If we were to approve the rezoning that's being sought, that would clear the way for the Royal Thai government to build an office building at this location. It would be subject to the restriction that it would be embassy use only under this rezoning, but once it's an office building, no one's going to purchase it as a house again.
That's right.
So your concern is that a future council might be willing to entertain an application from a future owner to remove that restriction on embassy use and simply allow it to be used as an office building.
That is correct, and I don't see how, even from the embassy's point of view, should they want to sell their property and no other embassy wishes to buy it, they really could claim that we are restraining their ability to recoup the investment in their property. And that argument might well be entertained. They might actually get that and set aside the zoning. I mean, even legally, they might be able to successfully argue that. So I think the issue is that we're putting an office building in an area, and in spite of the good intentions of staff to try to prevent it being used or becoming a full-scale office building open to anybody, I think that that's in our future. So it's not...
An embassy use has a certain cachet
Yes.
in our nation's capital, but I'll ask the same thing I asked to Mr. Forster. Is there any difference between an embassy and an office building from a functional perspective?
No, well, you know, if it was an embassy residence with the secondary office, you know, he has some office use, it would be very different from a full embassy office building, which is just like any other office building, regardless of what it looks like on the outside.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Next up is Bruce Enstone, followed by Peter Boos.
Pardon me, sorry?
Thank you, Heather.
Oh, all right.
Bruce Enstone's coming up. Is Bruce here? Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for hearing me. It's my understanding that the government of Thailand would have committed to a residence as part of the purchase process, which is reported to be 1987, and they would have agreed with the covenants for the particular covenant that applies to 180 Island Park Drive when they purchased. It would have been should have been or would have been a condition of their purchase, and the zoning shouldn't be changed in order to corrupt the agreement that the Thai government would have already made, which is to build only a residence on that property. And there are other commitments that they would have made in at the time they purchased it, as any purchaser of property on Island Park Drive is required to commit to. That's my arguments, which I've presented to you in more detail in a letter, of which you have a copy.
Yes, we do. Thank you, sir. Anyone have any questions? Thanks for coming out today and for
Thank you.
your written comments as well. Pierre Bruce?
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name's Peter Bowes. And,
Bowes, sorry.
And
I didn't know which one
not
to
the
go
first
with.
time it's been mispronounced. I'm a property owner and taxpayer in the residential neighborhood near the Thai Embassy. And I don't have a presentation today, and it's been very well represented by the previous speakers. So it's really more bottom line kind of questions. The embassy is or was operating under a bylaw that it was an ambassador's residence and that there could be some embassy-related office business conducted in the building. And that, of course, has not been adhered to, and I guess the city has just let it happen. And so now there's a proposal to amend the zoning bylaw for office use. And so I guess my question is, what is the actual zoning? Is it commercial? Is it commercial with potential other uses only related to embassies? Does such a thing actually exist? And therefore, what would prevent that building from being used for other purposes than related to the embassy, even while the Thai embassy owns the property, let alone if they decide to sell and other businesses decide to move in and use it for other commercial purposes. So I would just be very concerned about the precedent that's being set and what the real legal implications are of the zoning bylaw amendment.
Thank you. I would just like you raise some questions on what the zoning really does mean right now.
Yeah.
So JC, can you respond to that?
Certainly, Madam Chair. The proposed zoning will remain an R1 zoning, so a residential zoning. The proposed zoning is R1P with a special exception and a holding symbol. The special exception would limit, would introduce a new use, office use, but limited to an embassy building, as previously mentioned. Would also transfer over some setback requirements from the current zoning, the 7.6 meter front yard setback. And then the holding symbol would preclude them to have an approved site plan agreement before they remove the H.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
So that's all written down, it's all part of the zoning designation.
So, thank you, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. We have questions of Councillor Shirelli for staff, yes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is for City Solicitor. If you could just outline what restrictions we have in front of us based on the fact that this is an embassy property.
Madam Chair, colloquially, sometimes embassy property or diplomatic premises are referred to as foreign soil. That is not, in fact, the case. They continue to be under the jurisdiction of the laws of Canada, such as zoning bylaws. There are limitations, of course, on what enforcement measures can be taken. Staff would not be permitted to go in and inspect an office that was a diplomatic premises the way they would be able to do so in the case of other offices that didn't have that special status. So in summary, there are restrictions on enforcement, but other than that, the laws of Canada apply to embassies in the same way that they apply to other premises.
Councillor Leeper, questions? Yep.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of quick questions. Well, one might not be so quick. First off, do we have any indication from the applicant as to whether or not they intend to seek variances on the performance standards of the building?
Madam Chair, no, we don't.
Okay. So we don't have a blueprint for what the building is going to look like. They've given us some concepts. They've told us at this stage that they're going to build to within what the residential zoning would allow, but there's nothing to stop them from determining that they need a different configuration and going to the Committee of Adjustment to seek variances on those.
Madam Chair, just like anyone else, they'd have the opportunity, of course, you and me and everyone here, to go to the Committee of Adjustment as a right under the Planning Act. One thing we did do in terms of the zoning, we put a restriction on the amount, the size, 645 square meters, and we did not amend any of the performance standards through this rezoning, so if they were to build something, they would only be able to build what everyone else on the street could do. But of course, they have the right under the Planning Act to go and file for variances. Right. It would be 2 years after this zoning.
Yeah, there's the smart growth.
What was the last thing that you said?
As 2 years after this zoning, because we had the exception earlier today, so you have that 2-year window where they would, once the zoning goes through, that's what they have.
So just building on that, if this committee turns this down, is there another avenue for them to go down? Is that Committee of Adjustment?
And Mr. Mark can correct me if I'm wrong, but if they have a legal non-conforming right to be there, there's been an embassy, full-blown functioning embassy since 1987. Even though someone has been living there, say in the past at some time, there's still all the embassy functions have been there. They have a legal non-conforming right, and if they tore it down, they would have to go to they could go to the Committee of Adjustment to seek expansion of a legal non-conforming use to allow a building that's bigger than there.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
So
Do you have another question?
Yeah, the second piece is I think where the more important discussion is. Our zoning bylaw defines the R1 zone and what we're trying to achieve with the R1 zone as to regulate in a manner that is compatible with existing land use patterns so that the detached dwelling, residential character of a neighborhood is maintained or enhanced. That's our goal for R1. It doesn't stop non-residential uses by any means, but in our R1 zones, we are trying to maintain those as detached residential character of the neighborhood. The staff report doesn't deal with that. The staff report, when addressing whether or not this meets the intent of the zoning bylaw, speaks to the performance standards. And none of the presenters who were up here today spoke to the performance standards, how big the dwelling is going to be. What they're talking about is the incompatibility of the use in a residential neighborhood. I'm trying to understand why the staff report doesn't get into the overall intent of our R1 zone and to give us some comfort that this proposed rezoning to put an office building in the R1 zone meets with our stated intent under the zoning bylaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When we look at the application for proposed rezoning, we have to look at the policies of the official plan, and with an understanding of what R1, R2, or R3, or any residential zone is and what the intent of those are. But when you look at the policies, and this is a general urban area, and it allows commercial uses, non-residential uses in certain circumstances, and still in determining whether or not this was appropriate in reading the staff report, this is, in our staff's opinion, is at the edge of the community. It's on the periphery. It's a secluded area as you come in from the north off the parkway. So keeping in what all residential zones are trying to allow for, and looking at the policies that do establish where you can have non-residential uses, it was staff's determination that it was appropriate given this, and also given the history of it being here as a good neighbor for over 30 years. So we take a look at the policies and also keeping in mind what the residential zones are trying to do. And I just want to say, when people talk about precedent and precedent setting, although everyone has the right to come to, under the Planning Act, to come here and ask for permission to rezone a property, because we allowed it here, there is no such thing as precedent. There's no guarantee that it would be allowed in any other place. We look at this application on its own merit for this location, and we determined, keeping in mind, as I say, what residential zones are supposed to be and what the official plan says you can do to allow non-residential uses in residential areas, we felt it was appropriate for committee and eventually council to approve this.
And obviously, I disagree that, putting an office building, we speak a lot in the report to the periphery, but there is residential behind, residential to the side, residential across, and we're not talking about an edge condition in which we see a transition in intensity of use. This is an office building between single detached homes and parkland, right? This is going to stick out like a sore thumb, and I don't think it's compatible either with the parkland use or with the single residential that is next to it. This is, by my calculations, a kilometer from the transit station. Our official plan, so as far as I can tell, it's a good kilometer walk from either Westboro or from Chinese Pasture. Our official plan has policies around where we're trying to locate employment nodes, employers. Under our official plan, when we're thinking about where to put employment, this is a 16 parking spot office building. Is this the right place to an employer?
Madam Chair, well, we do have policies within the official plan that call for intensification, of course, around nodes. You can also take a look at the policies for general urban area, and noting that not all commercial or non-residential type uses will locate within, say, 600 meters of a transit station. So they will be located outside of that area. And as you say, as the councillor says, Madam Chair, that this is about a kilometer away. Under the policies of the official plan, there's still the opportunity to have commercial uses beyond that 600-meter desire circle in here. I would note that right now there's 14 parking spaces. There will only be 2 more parking spaces, and actually they'll be underground this time, so actually in reality it'll green up the site a little bit, but there's still the opportunity under policies to have commercial uses beyond a catchment area for a transit station.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the point of our grandfathering rules, I don't think the point of our non-conforming use rules is to simply assume that we should evaluate a new application in the context of something that was non-conforming. And that's what I'm hearing here is it has been used as an embassy under the pretense, I believe, of being a residence, of having a diplomatic mission attached, but they do have that non-conforming use. To what extent should we be considering that history, that non-conforming use, as justification to approve the new use?
Madam Chair, I think that a couple things. One, the first and foremost, you're going to look at the policies that the council has established within the official plan. But also, in terms of compatibility, I think there is some value being placed on what has happened there before and how it has functioned and fit into the community, whether or not a use has been a good neighbor or not. So it should be a consideration as well. But as I'll mention again, first and foremost are the policies of the official plan.
And again, I will disagree. I mean, we have non-conforming uses when things are not compatible with what is around them in our most current planning thinking, and I think that that is the case here. Sorry, I lost it. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Gower?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps building on Councillor Leeper's last point, I think we need to be very careful about legal non-conforming use and not thinking of that as a pilot project. Legal non-conforming is grandfathering, an unfortunate term, I think, but we're allowing a use for a site that's not part of the zoning almost as a courtesy. It's not a pilot project. And as part of legal non-conforming use, when that use discontinues, for example, in this case, if this building is to be demolished, it's an opportunity for our committee and our council to evaluate if that usage is appropriate in the current context. And that's really, I think, what we're deciding on today. We've heard from residents here that if there is a primary use as a residence and offices as part of that use, that's fine. And that's appropriate to the communities. But to change it to an office building is a significant change in the character of the community and the expectation of what a residential zone would allow for. I mean, I would encourage the applicant to take this back and look at how the
primary residential use could be the focus of this development with the office use as a secondary use there, and I think a lot of people in this room would be quite happy with that. I also think of my neighborhood where I can think of home businesses that have expanded, and there's more and more people working in the day in office buildings, in office environments within residential areas, and I'm thinking of that slippery slope that a decision today might lead to. But I did have one question, which was one of the presenters brought up mature neighborhoods overlay, and I was just curious how that would apply to the zoning or to the specific circumstance on Island Park in this application. Thank you.
Madam Chair, given the Section 130 non-residential uses in residential zones that was brought up earlier, and whereas any non-residential uses in a residential zone are subject to the the highest density residential uses permitted in that zone, this means that a office use as proposed would be considered as a residential use through the zoning. Therefore, that means that mature neighborhoods would apply, except for the front yard setback, because the front yard setback was established through a exception that came in after mature neighborhoods. These exception would take precedence over mature neighborhoods bylaw. But other than that, everything within the mature neighborhoods bylaw would apply, and the applicant has raised their or mentioned their intent to conform to the performance standards of the zoning bylaw.
Councillor Schwartz for comment, and then wrap up by Councillor Leeper.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's important to remember when we look at this, the present that we make as a capital to visitors. And Island Park Drive is a place people go to as tourists. It's a place they go down and they see very well presented residential area leading to Quebec. And it's a significant impression that makes on visitors to the area, and it's largely because we've defended the zoning and what we allow there. Now, I wasn't elected yet in the 1920s, but when the zoning came in, shortly after. But that was clearly a goal, and it's clearly a goal that's been achieved. It's been achieved with the help of the residents on the street. And when you look at putting in a different use, and you're relying, in order to agree to that use, you're relying on the goodwill of the existing owners. And that is not something that translates if they ever sell. And somebody coming in may decide to take full advantage of whatever new zoning we place on the property or inclusion that we put on the zoning. So that we have to remember, if they stay, then as Mr. Mark indicated, we have restrictions on how we can enforce a new provision that we put on that zoning. And I was uncomfortable enough if we didn't have the restrictions, but we do have restrictions. So I'd urge committee to reject the application and keep Island Park the way it is.
Okay, for wrap up, thank you, Councillor Shirley. Wrap up, Councillor Leeper.
Thank you, and I will try to keep it brief, Chair. I've gone back and forth with staff with respect to the integrity of our R1 zoning. We have a zoning bylaw that says here's what R1 is intended to do, and I believe that approving this application diminish the integrity of that R1. And I think everyone around this table has R1 zoning in their community. The thrust to rezone this property is really the result of expediency. This is the property that the Royal Thai government owns, and so it's the property that they want to rezone to allow that office building use in the R1. And I don't believe that expediency is a good planning grounds upon which to allow something that is going to diminish the integrity of our R1, I think, right across the city. All of us are responsive to the homeowners in R1s who want to preserve the character of their communities, and I think we would be sending them the wrong message by approving this application. You know, gives me some comfort that the route to go to the Committee of Adjustment to make the building bigger is not there for a couple of years. But if they want to add on to the building in something that exceeds what the zoning allows, they do have that Committee of Adjustment route to go down. That would not come back before us. That would presumably go to the Committee of Adjustment. There are other places in this city where we have said very specifically embassies can be built. And in my ward, we have down on Burnside near the Innovation Center, an entire new embassy sector that has been planned as part of the community design plan and secondary plan. I've started entertaining some discussions from potential developers of that land. There are places in the city you can put embassies. It's not up to us to rezone this in a way that is incompatible with the stated intent of our R1 zone when there are alternatives available. Expediency is not a good basis upon which to do land use planning. I would ask my colleagues to reject this application, and certainly the Royal Thai government has had my commitment on several occasions, as well as that of planning staff, to help them find a better place to put office building embassy. Thanks, colleagues.
Okay, so yeas and nays have been called on this. On 180 Island Park Drive. Wait, was there something else you were thinking? 180 Island Park Drive zoning bylaw amendment. Councillor Dudas.
Nay.
Councillor Gow?
No.
Councillor Shkreli? No. Councillor Leeper?
No.
Councillor Blais?
No.
Did you say no? Councillor Moffat?
Yes.
Councillor Hubley?
Yes.
Vice Chair Tierney?
No.
And myself, no. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the item is defeated. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, folks, for coming out today. Mr. Mark? Hang on, everybody.
Madam
Our
Chair.
legal expert has a comment. What did we do wrong?
You did nothing wrong, Madam Chair. I have been considering advice that I have given in the past as a way to make things more practical. The Chair will be aware, and former members of the committee will be aware, that with planning applications where a vote like this has occurred, you actually need to carry a vote refusing the item. And I'm looking at the committee coordinator for her concurrence, but as long as this item rises, even with no recommendation, staff would work with the ward councillor to draft the appropriate motion at council, so you do not immediately have to re-vote on this item at committee, if that is satisfactory to the chair.
It sounds great. Everybody pleased with that? Okay. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mark. Thank you, everyone, for coming out today. Just, though, for the record, if they choose to do nothing, not to tear down, not to rebuild, and still continue as they are, the legal non-conforming continues, right? Mr. Mark?
Even if they tear it down, the legal non-conforming rights continue. They are entitled to tear it down and to apply for a right to expand, or they're entitled to apply for a right to expand with the building in place to the Committee of Adjustment, Madam Chair.
Okay. I think that was part of the quandary as well, just why were they bothering? Anyway, that's just me thinking out loud. Next item up is 2983 and 3053 Navin Road. It's a zoning bylaw amendment, and it's the first application for our new councillor, Councillor Laura Dudas, and she's on the planning committee. So here you go. So we have Mr. Boughton here representing staff. We have Moscow, who's with the Catholic Women's League. Would you like to come forward and thank you. Thanks for coming out today.
Oops. Hi, my name is Kim Moscow, and I belong to the Convent Glen Riding Association. So I do a lot of shopping along Innes Road area where Mr. Blair governs, and close to Madame Dudas. I support only 4% development on that forest, following the World Heritage UNESCO Acts, with any city, town, village, any nation in the world, it's only supposed to have 40% raised towns, villages, etc. Catholic Women's League also is in support of the Pope's initiatives, Save the Planet. What I'm seeing on a personal level in the Innes Ward area toward Navan now, all these shopping malls, the banks finance them. They don't lease it all out. They are selling plastic goods produced in China and India, which are complete pollutants. They also, let's face it, have their own missile programs. There's a glut of housing in those areas, not just this province of Ontario, many others where the bankers who are often internationally funded, these billionaires don't even live in Canada. Many are from China and India. And they build the stuff and sell those properties, can't lease those malls. So the new style is you build on existing structures, or you sell the existing units. The other thing is with this oil and gas investment there for a bar to sell the gas. Let's face it, big oil has often been confronted. A lot of it is their European countries like Shell and things. And there's rumors too that Canada is selling Arabic oil. So when they build this new bar, where is this gas and oil coming from? You know, recently in Toronto, there was a terrible mall attack. She's frankly before the courts for having attacked persons in a Canadian Tire in Toronto. Why would I be supporting oil and gas people that belong to ISIS attacks here in Canada and abroad in the world? So I really think that for that area, they should follow World Heritage UNESCO Act, which is 40% development. I don't see too where geological survey was consulted for when you're removing forested areas. It's supposed to be tested for the minerals. And I don't see anywhere in the report where they've been contacted. There's a federal level and there's a provincial level. Other thing that concerns me about that is the, expansion of carbon footprint. Many other things out there. Why expand further? I would suggest following World Heritage UNESCO Act, which is you would leave 60% of that forest there if you absolutely had to have it where you walk to the mall. I saw the statement in the press, this is why I'm here, where there's a gal there that wants to be able to walk to the mall. Well, you're in the suburbs. Usually people that live in the suburbs have enough money to either bus there or take their car, or ride a bike, or pay for a taxi. With the OC, frankly, expansions, yes, you had a very serious crash in this city less than 10 days ago. And the other thing that's showing up about all this international banking is The monies comes in through the banking systems. Like this Thai embassy, they introduced their idea.
Okay, Kim.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking at around the committee. Any questions for a delegation? Seeing none. Oh, you do have a question? Councillor Dudas.
Thank you, Kim, for coming. I just wanted to note that the site, it's very wooded, you're completely correct in that. However, it is right across the street from the Mayor Bog and a vast, immensely vast portion of green space. Yes. So while I don't disagree that, preserving our green space is absolutely essential, that particular site is adjacent to a large expanse of that. So,
and I'm with the Pope. I am with the Catholic Swimming League. It's the new style in the world. It's still going on, Save the Planet. I do believe in the Ontario Conservation Acts. There might be water tributaries in Mare Blue.
And I'm sure staff are looking into all that, so thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Black's here from Fullerton. If we have any questions, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Black? No? Unless you want to say something for the record. Anyone have any questions for staff? I know this has been worked on for quite a while. No? So is the item carried? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the staff that came out to support this item as well. Okay, so now we're going to go to the item that we approved adding, which I just have to. Yeah. This is the 168 Daly Avenue that Vice Chair Tierney painstakingly read out. As you saw, Councillor Fleury came early on in the meeting and confirmed the fact that he has no problem with this. So is this item carried? Carried, thank you. And you will follow up and get more information. Okay. Did you want this copy of this motion? All right. Okay, so that's that bit of business. So we do have a notice of motion. Jeff, you're moving it?
Thanks.
On behalf of Councillor Kavanagh?
Yeah, this is on behalf of Councillor Kavanagh. It's a direction to planning staff to initiate a rezoning of 975 Woodruff Avenue, whereas the site plan application at 975 Woodruff Avenue was approved for 8 townhouse units, and whereas the number of bedrooms has increased beyond what anyone in the community could have anticipated during the approval phase, and whereas this intensity creates community concerns related to parking, garbage, traffic, and noise, and whereas there are concerns that this intensity will further increase if this development operates as a rooming house. Therefore, be it resolved that staff initiate a rezoning for 975 Woodruff Avenue to remove rooming house as a permitted use on this site. That's a notice of motion, so that'll be discussed at our next meeting, I assume.
Right, on February the 14th, and there will be, it's a notice of motion, so we don't need to discuss it, everybody. But this item will be going to that committee, and I'm sure that when you find out which unit it is, what the address, what is at the address, that you'll understand why this is being initiated. So that'll come with the councillor's report. Okay? Councillor Kavanagh, okay? Thank you. All right. So, any inquiries? No? In other business, we do have some other business. As you know, Jeff, this will be interesting to you, I think. I think you're going to be interested. As you know, the province has an ongoing consultation on increasing housing supply in Ontario. Staff from several departments have prepared a draft 5-page technical staff response letter to the province responding to their 5 questions. Mr. Willis is going to email that out to the planning committee members before the end of the week. If you have comments, you can send those back to him by early next week, since we would like to finalize this letter so that council can endorse it being sent. Although the deadline for comments is this week, Mr. Willis has already notified the province that we will be commenting and that our comments will be late due to our committee and council schedule following the election. If members have any questions, you can speak with Mr. Willis directly. Okay, so that's the other business, and we're adjourned, and the next meeting is going to start off with Beyond 2036. It's really the kickoff of our new official plan, and I hope you'll all come out and be ready to kickstart that. It's going to be very, very exciting. It's very exciting to be part of it.
It's a Valentine's Day meeting?
It's a Valentine's Day meeting.
Seems apropos.
I will bring chocolate for you. Is that what you like?
I'm thinking it's very apropos. We'll have a
Yeah.
Beyond.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned till the 14th of February.
All right.
What now?